Many of you have seen the TV show or a TV show, maybe America's Funniest Home Videos, or a link on Facebook, or maybe even on YouTube. You've seen these videos of kids getting a birthday present or a Christmas present, and they tear into the box, and when they unwrap the paper, they find something they weren't anticipating. And they have this look of anger on their faces because it's not what they wanted, right? I saw a video of where one kid had torn into the wrapping paper and opened the box, looked at the box, and there was a picture on the box of a pottery wheel. The inscription on the box read, "Make pottery at home, fun for the whole family." It's not what he was anticipating. It's not what he was expecting. And you see the kid's face go from excitement to disappointment. He wanted the Xbox 360, now the Xbox One. He wanted the Xbox. That's what he wanted, but he's got this pottery wheel picture of on the box. Suddenly, the kid throws the box across the room. He's yelling at his parents. He's stomping around. He's slamming doors. He's not very happy. We adults kind of have learned as we've grown up how to deal with disappointment. But many of us, I think, can relate to that young kid, right? We want to throw stuff across the room when things don't go our way, I think. Yes, no, maybe, with me? Let me see those heads. Yes, okay, good, you're with me. For instance, wives, you know what it's like. You've been hinting to your husband all along, you want this piece of jewelry, and when you open up the box on your birthday or anniversary or Christmas, what you get instead is a box of Nutrisystem or something like that. Husbands, same thing. You've been hinting, it's time for a new phone, maybe the new iPhone, 5C or 5S, and the day comes when you open up this present. It's the same size and shape as that little box as the iPhone, but when you unwrap the present, you see she's bought you nose hair trimmers. We don't want nose hair trimmers, ladies. We want the iPhone 5, right? So we know what it's like to have this anticipation to open a present and not get what we really want. But that's how life goes, isn't it? We don't always get what we want, but we always get what we need, I think. And that's where we find ourselves. We don't get the job that we were wanting. The date we went on wasn't as exciting as we thought it was going to be. Maybe you got married and you had this excitement and anticipation and joy, but you unwrap the gift, and sometimes it takes a long time to unwrap when you first get married, that gift, you know what I'm saying? And you unwrap the gift and all of a sudden it's not what you expected. And so life leads to loss and disappointment. You've opened up the wrapping paper, and the box isn't exactly what you thought it would be. And that's where we find ourselves in the book of Ruth, chapter 9 of the story. If there were a video camera rolling in the story, you would see a lot of different expressions, right? You read the story last week. How many of you read chapter 9? Let me see those hands. A little fewer are going up. That's all right. Chapter 10 next week. But anyway, you read chapter 9 last week, and we find that we see different expressions. At the beginning, there's this expression of joy and happiness and wonderment. It's awesome. But also we see these expressions of disappointment and anger. What's happened here? Here's Elimelech. He marries this woman named Naomi. Now, I don't have a slide for this, but write this in your notes. Naomi means pleasant or sweet. Pleasant or sweet. And that's how the story starts. Pleasant and sweet with Naomi. Her name is a beautiful description of her life at the beginning of the story. Beautiful description. Her life is full and very satisfying. Pleasant and sweet, as her name says. There's joy on both their faces, on Naomi's face and her husband Elimelech's face. There's excitement as the family grows. First one son, then a second son. They're living the dream. They've got each other and life is grand. They've got the house with the white picket fence and everything is good. And they've got the family, but it's not too long into the story that we see disappointment set in. Naomi's expression changes from joy to disappointment. A famine has ravaged the land, we see, and they can no longer stay where they are. We don't really comprehend this today. Things have gotten bad for us, maybe in Barberton. Some of you have lost jobs and things like that. But we've got our amenities still, I think. We don't really understand what famine really means, but maybe you could imagine it this way. Let's say your husband comes home from work one day, and he tells you, honey, they let me go at work today. Some of you have been there, you know what that's like, but maybe it gets a little worse than that. She says, okay, things are going to be okay, we'll get through this, and you believe her, but 6 months pass, and nothing's really happening. You've depleted your savings. You've moved out of your house into a small apartment. You've done everything you can to make ends meet. You've sold your car, and now 6 months turns into 2 years, still no employment. And you see this has affected the whole region. Everybody's out of work, and it's really spread through everybody, and you don't know how you're going to take care of your family. You don't know where your next meal is coming from. When you put your kids to bed at night, you hear their growling stomachs over their nighttime prayers. And you don't know what's going to happen, what you're going to eat for supper tomorrow. You used to worry about things like your retirement and what you were going to wear to work tomorrow. Now all you're worried about is how are we going to feed our family? We don't understand that, but you're desperate, and finally your husband comes to you and he says, we can't stay here any longer. It's time to move on. And this is where we find Elimelech and Naomi. They can't stay here any longer. They have to leave home. They have to find a new place to live. So they leave the promised land. They're living in Israel. Life is okay. The famine is hit, but they've got to move on to find more food. So they leave the promised land. They find themselves in Moab. Now the people of Moab are descendants of the people of Sodom. Remember Sodom? The city that God destroyed because its people were so evil. This is where these are the descendants that Elimelech and Naomi find themselves living among. But despite their desperation and having left home, Naomi feels like her life is full. She actually describes her life as full. Despite this famine going on and all this bad stuff happening, Naomi says, you know what, my life is pretty full when we left Bethlehem. They're okay. She has her husband. She has her 2 boys. She has God in her life. Everything is okay. It's not as bad as it could be. But then the wrapping paper comes off. And she reads the writing on the box. And life is not so good. Elimelech, first he gets sick and dies. He leaves Naomi caring for her 2 younger children, Mahlon and Chilion, their 2 sons. Everything is not going so well at that point, but the 2 boys grow up. They fall in love. They get married to 2 Moabite women, foreigners, Ruth and Orpah. They found love. However, the good feeling doesn't last too long for Naomi and her family. These 2 weddings are followed quickly by 2 funerals. Both her sons die. Naomi's lost her husband and now her 2 sons. And you can imagine the grief that Naomi is going through at this point. Everything is lost. She has nothing left. So what happens? She decides that she really doesn't have much choice but to move back home. Might as well go back home. She tells her daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah, to stay in Moab. This is where they're from. They could fall in love there again, find new husbands, and live a happy life, start a new family. So Orpah gets out of there. Remember, she leaves. She's like, okay, I'll find another husband. We don't really read much more about Orpah. She just beats feet and gets out of there. But Ruth replied in verse 16 of chapter 1, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. She's talking to Naomi. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, your God, my God. And where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me. And when Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her to stay, that is. So we see this, we see how Ruth is dedicated to Naomi and staying with her and protecting her. And so Naomi and Ruth, they journeyed back to Naomi's hometown. Where's Naomi's hometown? Do you remember from the story? Anybody? Bethlehem. They go back to Bethlehem. Remember we'd been talking about God's upper story and our lower story? Bethlehem. That should ring a bell, okay? So they go back to Bethlehem. Bethlehem is a town of less than a couple hundred people at this point, all right? So when Naomi returns home, this is pretty big news. Everybody's talking, you know? They're saying, wow, here's Naomi, but wait, is it really her? She looks so much different now. I mean, life's not been too good on her. But we're pretty sure this is her. The whole town's talking, but her life has been pretty hard on her. She looks a little depressed. At the beginning of the story, Naomi is pleasant and sweet, and everything is good and beautiful. Now Naomi tells the townspeople that she wants to be called something else, Mara. Call me Mara, which means bitter. Life hasn't been so good on me, she tells the people. She tells them, I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. Ever been there? You ever get so angry with God, you start blaming Him for the bad things that are going on in your life? The Lord has done this to me. This is where Naomi is. You see the expression on her face. It's one of anger. God let her down. Her story wasn't supposed to turn out this way. She's supposed to have a big, happy family with 2 daughters-in-law who were supposed to be having children by this point so she could have grandchildren. But God has afflicted her, Naomi says. It's God's fault that I'm in this condition. It's God's fault that life hasn't turned out the way I wanted it to be. We look at Naomi's story, and all we see at this point really is a story about loss. It's disappointing where Naomi is in life. And some of you, I think, are there today. You look back on the story of your life and you think, it hasn't been that great. It's been nothing but loss. You've labeled yourself as something bad, bitter, not so good, Mara, instead of Naomi. And so you look at your life as a loss. But here's the question I would ask. Does Naomi's story and does your story really have to be about loss? Is it really that depressing? Does your story have to be about loss? I read about a guy named Gerald Sitzer. He's a professor at Whitworth College in Spokane, Washington. Now, here's what happened. Gerald was driving down the road with his family, and a drunk driver appeared out of nowhere and slammed into their vehicle. When that happened, it killed Gerald's mom, Gerald's wife, and Gerald's daughter. He was the only one left from the accident. Didn't even have a scratch on him. 3 generations around him passed. Gerald had written a book. He's written a book called A Grace Disguised. You might want to pick it up, A Grace Disguised. And it describes his long journey through this experience, how he got over and through this traumatic experience of losing his family like this. And here's what Gerald says. He says, the experience of loss does not need to be the defining moment of our story. The defining moment can be our response to the loss. The story doesn't have to be about the loss. The story could be about our response to the loss. In other words, we don't get to decide what roles we play when it comes to the story of our lives, but we get to decide how we play the roles we've been given. We don't get to decide what role we are or what role we have in life. But we get to decide how we play that role. That's what Gerald is saying. How do you deal with the circumstances in your life is how you're going to play that role out. So here's the question. Are we going to let our stories be about loss? Are we going to let our stories be nothing but negative and bad and terrible and bitter like Mara? Or could the story be about something different? It would be easy at this point for Naomi or Mara to just get lost in the pain of her lower story, you know? She could stay angry with God. A lot of us tend to stay there. It's God's fault. We tend to stay there. She could stay there. We tend to just focus on the negative, right? We see this box of disappointment, the pottery wheel. It's not what we wanted. It's not what we anticipated. And all we think about is the disappointment in our lives. And so our lives become this negative attitude that affects others. Nobody wants to be with us. So is this a story about disappointment or loss? I say no. I think a better word to describe the story would be redemption. It's a story of redemption, not loss. If you look at the rest of the story, Ruth and Naomi, they move back to Bethlehem. And in chapter 2, Ruth ends up picking up leftover grains from a close relative of Elimelech. Elimelech, of course, is Naomi's husband who's dead now. So Ruth ends up in this field of Boaz, picking up these leftover grains, and Boaz takes favor with Ruth. He's impressed by her, and he allows her to pick up the leftover grains behind his hired harvesters. He goes so far as to tell Ruth not to glean anywhere else. Just glean in my own field. And not only that, but we'll protect you. Ruth finds protection working on Boaz's farm. And I love this. Boaz finds out about Ruth's dedication to Naomi. Her reputation preceded her. Boaz finds this all out, and he's really impressed. Look at Ruth chapter 2, verses 11 and 12. Boaz replied, I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Isn't that neat? Her reputation preceded her. Boaz found out who she was and how dedicated she was to her mother-in-law. Well, Naomi finds out where Ruth is gathering all this food. And Naomi comes to Ruth and advises her to continue to glean from Boaz's fields. So Ruth works beside Boaz's harvesters, the women, until the end of the barley harvest and the end of the wheat harvest. And all the while, Ruth is living with her mother-in-law, Naomi. She's taking care of the family. She's protecting Naomi. She's looking out for her. And she told Naomi, I will be with you wherever you go. Your God will be my God. And I'll help you. I'll help you out. And so here's what happens. Naomi devises a plan. Remember last week how we talked about women and their influence and power over people? Women are so manipulative in the Bible. All right, so Naomi devises this really cool plan. She wants her daughter-in-law to find a new home. She wants her to have a husband, to have a family, to start life anew. So here's what happens. What better place to find it than with Boaz, right? Might as well get married to Boaz, Ruth. So here's what happens. Naomi comes to Ruth. She tells her, wash and perfume yourself and put on your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there until he is finished eating and drinking. Never mess with a man before he's done eating and drinking. Women, take note. All right, she goes on. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying, then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do. Yeah, you know what? There's nothing like a woman getting all dolled out and smelling really good for a man and then going and hiding in the dark and spying on you. Love that. Yes, you get the image, right? I mean, this is voyeurism before it became popular. So she's there in the dark, seeing where this guy's laying down, right? This is crazy. What a weird marriage proposal. We think about marriage proposals and things we do as men. We go out, but Ruth wants to get Boaz to marry her, and this is how it's going to happen. She's going to give him a hint. Hey, Boaz, I want to be with you. What a weird way to do it. But anyway, here's what happens. So Ruth follows Naomi's instructions, and then scaring Boaz half to death in the middle of the night. All right. He's like, whoa, what? There's a woman laying at my feet. What's going on here? He's scared to death, but then he realizes it's Ruth, and Ruth gets Boaz to agree to marry her. Women are good at this, all right? They're good. So the first thing that Boaz has to do, though, is get the closest guy in the family to let go of the estate, known as the kinsman redeemer. All right, remember, Elimelech is dead. The two boys are dead. So the next closest family member would inherit or actually buy back the field and any property that came with it. So Boaz is not that guy. There's another guy out there who's closer in relation than Boaz. So Boaz goes to town, and it doesn't look very promising at first. Boaz goes to the middle of the city. He meets with the kinsman redeemer. And there's 10 village leaders there. I almost see it as kind of a court of law. They're all set up, outside the city somehow. And Boaz tells this guy, here's what's going on. All right, he informs the kinsman redeemer that Elimelech, their relative, of course, is dead, and his 2 sons are gone. So the next person who should get the property is you, kinsman redeemer. So his estate is up for grabs. Only the kinsman redeemer, of course, has right of first refusal. If you don't want it, I'll take it. All right? But the kinsman redeemer says, okay, I'll take it. Doesn't look so good for Boaz. That means the estate and Ruth go to this kinsman redeemer. He's got to take Ruth in as his wife and care for her and take care of her so that the estate stays in Elimelech's name. But after Boaz informs the kinsman redeemer of all this that goes with it, not only would he get the estate, but he'd also get Ruth as his wife in order to keep the estate in Elimelech's name. The kinsman redeemer says, you know what, then I can't redeem this property. I can't redeem it because I might endanger my own estate. Remember, Ruth is a foreigner. He might endanger his own estate. So he says, you redeem it yourself. I can't do it. So then it jumps back to Boaz. In verse 9, Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth, the Moabitess, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from the town records. Today you are witnesses. All right, so you get the idea. Property is identity. If Elimelech's name died with the property, then it would be as if Elimelech had never existed. So his namesake must be preserved here. Boaz buys back the property. He marries Ruth, and the Lord enables them to conceive, and she gives birth to a son. Naomi takes the child. Naomi, this is cool. Naomi takes the child, lies the child in her lap, and cares for him. And the women of the town are talking again. All right? Before they were saying, whoa, is this Naomi? She doesn't look so good. Now they're saying, hey, Naomi has a son. They're attributing this son to Naomi, not Ruth. Catch that. All right? So Naomi has a son. Her name is no longer Mara. It's not bitter anymore. They call her Naomi. Pleasant and sweet. Beautiful. Naomi's life has been restored. Redemption. Naomi has a son. They name him Obed. Obed becomes the father of Jesse. Jesse becomes the father of David. Naomi thought she came back empty. She thought her life was the pottery wheel box. She thought God had abandoned her. But if she could have just seen through her tears, she would have seen that God was at work in the midst of her loss. That God was at work redeeming the story, making it right. How does God redeem the story? How does God redeem your story in your loss? First, write these down in your notes. We'll go through these pretty quickly. He redeems the story of loss with an unlikely friendship. There's an unlikely friendship that appears in this story, and he does that with us. Naomi's daughter-in-law, Ruth, stuck around to comfort her and protect her and take care of her and protect her and live with her. God has a unique way of putting people in your life for this very reason. You've seen it in your loss and grief. God brings people into your life to give you the strength to get through. I saw this just last week. They don't know I'm going to talk about him, but Jack and Carol are here. Carol lost her brother last week. And I got to the funeral home for calling hours, and there we were, and Pam Shoemaker was right by her side. And Carol just kept saying, boy, if it wasn't for Pam, I don't know how I'd get through this. God put Pam in Carol's life for such a time as that. You know, and God does that with us. He puts people in our lives because we don't know at what point we might need that strength and comfort. Unlikely friendships. Who are the unlikely friendships you have in your life? You look around and you go, my goodness, I would never have been friends with this person, but God brought this person in my life and has gotten me through a lot of crazy stuff. Second, God redeems the story of loss with undeserved kindness. There's an undeserved kindness here. I look at the story of Boaz and I go, my goodness, I think in a million years I could never have done that. You know? There's no way. But Boaz comes along, he redeems Elimelech's property, and he takes responsibility for Ruth. This was no small act of kindness, especially when you consider that Ruth, of course, is a Moabite, a foreigner. And any Israelite man in his right mind would not marry a foreigner. It just wouldn't happen. Maybe Boaz is a little crazy. Maybe not. Maybe he's just got that unlikely, undeserved kindness that he can pour out to Ruth. The significance, of course, of this is astounding. All right, when we think about who Boaz is, you know the mother of Boaz. Remember that prostitute in Jericho? You see how God works in our lower stories to produce his upper story? Boaz's mother was Rahab, the prostitute from Jericho. But not only that, God continues in his upper story to write into our lower story and redeems the story with an unpredictable ending. The story ends with a genealogy. Now, genealogies I get to in the Bible, I'm like, oh, I'd skip over that. I can't pronounce half these names anyway. This is crazy. I don't even know who these people are, you know? But this genealogy is kind of interesting. We wonder why is the book of Ruth in the Bible right here? Boaz and Ruth have Obed. Obed has Jesse, and Jesse has David, King David. Who would descend from King David but Jesus? How cool is that? God in his upper story was working on a man named Boaz to redeem a field. But also God in his upper story was working through Ruth and Naomi to provide them a son later on down the road who would redeem the world. Tell me God doesn't know what he's doing. And I'll say you're crazy. He's got a whole plan. Well, after the kid in the video throws the box across the room, as talking about in the opening here, Mom goes over, she picks up the box off the floor. Pottery wheel, remember? Fun for the whole family. She picks up the box, she takes it over to her son, and she gets him to calm down, you know? And she insists that he opens the box. Just open the box. Look inside. And when he opens the box, what's he find inside but his Xbox 360? A couple extra games, an extra controller. And you see that anger go to excitement and joy. And it turns out this wasn't meant to be a joke either, okay? She tells her son, look, this was the only box I could fit everything in. What a great moment. So the box you may be looking at in your own life may have a label on it. It may say widow. It may say divorced. It may say cancer, terminated, infertile, or abused. You've labeled your life with something that's bitter. Mara. Your story doesn't have to be about loss. It doesn't have to be your story, whatever label you've used. So before you stomp out of the room and slam the door because you don't like what you see written on your box, take the time to open it. Look inside. God has something in store for you, and it may be the box you're looking at is the only box that He could fit everything in. God redeems your story. Your story can be about redemption.